My name is Dr. Gina Lane. I'm the chair of communication and theater here at William Jewell College. And for 27 years, I served as Jewell's debate coach. And it's in that context that I have such fond memories of our speaker this morning, Ms. Lilia Toson. Lilia is here with members of her family and her parents and family and friends and her son Malcolm. And so I know that they are looking forward to hearing her words, as I know all of us are. I'd like to start with a quotation from Coretta Scott King. "Women, if the soul of the nation is to be saved, I believe that you must become its soul." When I read these words, I thought these words exemplify the life and character of our speaker, Lilia Toson. Lilia is a 2007 graduate of William Jewell College. I'm not sure how that's possible, but I do remember all the way back then, the very first day I met Lilia. I had heard that she was a strong-willed, incredibly intelligent, outstanding speaker. But I was not prepared for the combination of laughter, confidence, ease, and care that she brought to William Jewell College. It was a care for others that she did not give away easily, but was fiercely protective of once given. And yes, she was fierce. I got to know Lilia that day as we mutually decided that she would be a member of our debate team, but little did I know how fierce she was going to be. She was competitive. Every round mattered. And the careful preparation, intelligence, and persuasion that she brought to every debate round paid off. While I often told our debaters that they needed to speak with more confidence and presence, I never had to say that to Lilia. She brought it from day one. And by her sophomore year, now I want you to think about this, her sophomore year, her second year in college debate, she made her presence known around the nation, winning round after round and bringing home the top speaker award at the National Parliamentary Tournament of Excellence as a sophomore. But yes, she was just that great. But you see, debate was more than just winning to Lilia. It was a calling. I remember well when she came to me and said she wanted to write a debate case to advocate for the restoration of felon voting rights after prison. That case was nearly unbeatable in debate rounds. And then this last November, when the people of Florida had to pass a ballot initiative to restore those rights and do what their politicians would not, I thought to myself, Lilia, you just chalked up another win. Lilia was a political science major here at Jewell, and she said that her classes prepared her for the wide variety of audiences and perspectives she would have to face in the practice of law. She always knew that she wanted to go to law school, so it was not surprising when her LSAT score and her grades sent her to NYU, one of the top schools in the nation. Today, Lilia is an outstanding attorney for the state of New York, working as an assistant attorney general in civil rights cases for the Social Justice Division. The fierce advocacy that she honed at Jewell is now helping others. Most recently, Lilia was a key member of a team in the Attorney General's office that won an important fight against the Trump administration's attempt to shut down New York as a sanctuary city for immigrants. Ladies and gentlemen, It is my great honor to introduce a fierce advocate for justice and a woman who is one of those souls fighting for our nation, Ms. Lilia Toson.
Good morning. Thank you so much, Gina, for that introduction, and thank you all for being here today to celebrate Martin Luther King Day with us in the Northland. Thank you also to William Jewell College for hosting this celebration and for inviting me to speak. I owe an additional and special thank you to William Jewell as my alma mater for allowing me during college not just the space to think about my studies in preparation for living a good life, but also for giving me space and the imperative to think about living well, valuing myself, my friends and my family, and my relationship with God. Before I delve into my remarks today, I do have to give a disclaimer that while we have a Black woman Attorney General in the state of New York, I am not her, so any of the views I express today are solely my own. I thought a lot about those views today as I considered the theme for the celebration, 400 years of perseverance and survival, the dream lives on. As you may know, the theme commemorates the 400th anniversary of the arrival of the first 20 Africans who were brought to Virginia to be enslaved in 1619. What a meaningful anniversary it is to recognize, and one that so resonates today. Dr. King, when speaking about the condition of African Americans in this country, once said, "Abused and scorned though we may be, our destiny is tied up in the destiny of America. Before the Pilgrim Fathers landed at Plymouth, we were here. Before Jefferson etched across the pages of history the majestic words of the Declaration of Independence, we were here. Before the beautiful words of the Star-Spangled Banner were written, we were here. For more than 2 centuries, our forebears labored without wages. They made cotton king. They built the homes of their masters in the midst of the most humiliating and oppressive conditions, and yet, out of a bottomless vitality, they continued to grow and develop." And indeed, the resilience and contributions of Africans and African Americans throughout the United States, despite the impact of slavery and racial discrimination over the course of those 400 years, is nothing short of miraculous. Dr. King recognized this over and over, once saying, and this is a long quote, but I think it's worth listening to, in 1863, the Negro was granted freedom from physical slavery through the Emancipation Proclamation, but he was not given land to make that freedom meaningful. At the same time, our government was giving away millions of acres of land in the Midwest and the West, which meant that the nation was willing to undergird its poor white peasants from Europe with an economic floor, while refusing to do the same for its Black peasants from Africa who were held in slavery for 240 years. And this is why Frederick Douglass would say that emancipation for the Negro was freedom to hunger, freedom to the winds and rains of heaven, freedom without roofs to cover their heads. It was freedom without food to eat, without land to cultivate. It was freedom and famine at the same time, and it is a miracle that the Negro has survived. I would go even further than Dr. King and say that it is a miracle that the Black community in this country has, despite it all, not only survived, but even thrived in certain areas. That is why individuals who are working today are able to say that Dr. King's dream lives on. And part of the beauty of an annual celebration like this one is that each year we can use this occasion both to be backward and forward-looking. Looking for inspiration, but also looking for a blueprint for each of us who seek to advance Dr. King's quest for justice and equality, a quest that is ongoing, not only for African Americans, but also for countless others who are oppressed in this country and around the world. So I've been led to think about how Africans and African Americans have accomplished what they have in the United States, in the hope that it will give me some guidance for my life and the life of this country, and that I might share some of that guidance with you today. How is it that despite slavery and despite continuing oppression, we are here to celebrate resilience and contribution in the face of it all? I'm reminded of one of the 2 songs that the Queen of Gospel and good friend of Dr. King, Mahalia Jackson, sang at the March on Washington. It's actually one of my mother's favorite songs, How I Got Over. And the beginning of the song says simply, how I got over, How did I make it over? You know, my soul looks back and wonder, how did I make it over? That question, how did I make it over? And its collective parallel, how did we make it over, is a revealing one, not just in looking backward at our past, but also looking at the future. So this being Martin Luther King Jr. Day, I'd like to take a look at how I think he might have answered that question, of how we made it here, and perhaps more importantly, how we might get from here to there. Like any good Baptist or any good lawyer, if you want to know how a writer would have answered a question, you look first at what they wrote before. And we know that Dr. King was a prolific writer, and we know that Dr. King was a prolific orator. So I started my journey to answer this question of how we made it over with an adventure through his sermons. And I started with the sermons and not the speeches for a reason. Because as Dr. King said, in the quiet recesses of his heart, he was fundamentally a clergyman, a Baptist preacher. It was those quiet recesses of his heart, well before he became the famous Dr. King that we know now, that produced a sermon called The 3 Dimensions of a Complete Life. We know that this was an important sermon to Dr. King for at least a couple of reasons. First, this was the sermon that he preached as his trial sermon before he was ever elected the pastor at Dexter Avenue Baptist Church. So we know he cared a lot about this sermon because he needed this sermon in order to get his job. He wouldn't have been the pastor at Dexter Avenue Baptist Church if this sermon wasn't any good. And second, this was a sermon that he preached every year after that for the rest of his life. The last time he preached this sermon was April 9, 1967, almost a year to the day before he was assassinated. And I imagine that had he not been assassinated, he may have preached this sermon again in April of 1968. Iterating on and repeating this sermon every year wasn't mandated by any liturgy. It was something that Dr. King did because he wanted to do it, or maybe because he felt called to do it. I like to think that it was the latter, that like all of us, Dr. King was wrestling with the concept of what it means to live the life that God has called you to live in every respect. That he mulled this over in his mind every year while he edited the sermon, that he would be glad to revisit the topic after each tumultuous year of his short but impactful life, hoping that his restlessness about how to fulfill the call of his life would one year be replaced by peace. I believe that image of a man who has come to symbolize so much about the struggle for the soul of our nation, struggling internally with who he is meant to be and what he is meant to do, can be instructive for each of us. So I hope that you'll let me spend my time this morning talking with you about what Dr. King described as the complete life, the length, the breadth, and the height. First, I want to explain why I've decided to focus on our individual lives, when the theme of the program would seem to lend itself so much to discussion of our collective action, both over the years and going forward. And that's because I believe, as Dr. King said, that social progress never rolls in on the wheels of inevitability. It comes through the tireless efforts and the persistent work of dedicated individuals. It's easy to look backward and see the collective groups, see the governments, see the movements, but all of that action started with individual people deciding what to make of each of their own lives. In his time, Dr. King was a powerful individual contributor. And in the 3 dimensions of a complete life, he exhorted us to also be individual contributors by considering the length of life, the inward concern for how far one can go for the sake of your own individual ambition, but also the breadth of life, the outward concern for the welfare of others, and the height of life, what he described as the upward reach for God. The length of life, that inward concern for one's own welfare that pushes a life forward, is important. Dr. King said in a speech about economic justice that it's all right to talk about long white robes over yonder and all of its symbolism, but ultimately, people want some suits and some dresses and some shoes to wear down here too. Dr. King called it a rational and a healthy self-interest that makes us desire and pursue economic self-sufficiency. And I want to drill down on that for any students who are in the audience today. You might believe, based on the introduction, that because I'm a public servant, I'm going to tell everyone they need to be a public servant, but that's not the case. I'm a public servant now, and I feel called to be a public servant in this particular cultural moment. but I started my career at a large law firm. And I'm saying to you that you don't have to deny yourself the ability to sustain yourself or your family in order to live a complete life or a life that God has ordained. And if you are a Black student, you are not required to forego any opportunity that you want to pursue in order to add to the legacy of our people in this country. That pursuit of economic self-sufficiency can assist in our discovery of a larger calling. I wouldn't have the skills or the tools that I have now if I hadn't pursued economic self-sufficiency first. Dr. King explained that we must be so concerned about ourselves that we set out early in life to discover what we are made for. And when we discover what we are made for, we can then use that discovery to drive us forward through the length of life. But Dr. King also called for us to do more, to live for more than ourselves and our families, to live for all of humanity, which is where I'd like to spend most of my time today. It's relatively easy to put oneself first, to live the length of life. But for some reason, we as human beings sometimes have trouble reaching very far outside of ourselves to try to live the breadth of life. I say that because Dr. King's vision of serving humanity involves more than just paying tithes or giving money to charity. Dr. King spoke of a dangerous altruism. Of course, he not only spoke it, but also lived it, surviving a stabbing, multiple bombings, and constant threats to his life. But the danger that many people are avoiding today isn't limited to the slim risk that any of us would be recognized, let alone targeted for a political assassination. It's danger not to one's life, but to one's position in life. Dr. King called for us to reject this fear and avoidance in order to exhibit that dangerous altruism. An altruism that's not done from the comfort of your own home or from the comfort of your own church or from the comfort of your own community. It's an altruism that's, when done properly, takes you out of all of your comfort zones. Dr. King once said, and we must know on some positions, cowardice asks the question, is it safe? Expediency asks the question, is it politic? Vanity asks the question, is it popular? But conscience asks the question, is it right? And there are times when you must take a stand that is neither safe, nor politic, nor popular, but you must do it because it is right. Those words might not seem particularly radical to us now. Dr. King was standing up for racial justice, which most of us will now say was the right stand to take. Indeed, the legacy of Dr. King in the last 20 years or so has become one of America's best examples of revisionist history. Schools teach our children that Dr. King defeated a few bad segregationist actors by standing up to them, non-violently of course, that a lone rogue gunman targeted him, and that the nation universally mourned his loss. But none of this is true. Fighting segregation, let alone fighting for true equality, wasn't safe or politic or popular in the general public at the time. In an early 1968 Harris poll, just before he was assassinated, Dr. King had a 75% disapproval rating in the United States. People say we live in a highly polarized time, and I checked the Harris polls up until last week, and I couldn't find a president, any president, including Nixon right before he resigned, who had a 75% disapproval rating. But Dr. King did. He had that disapproval rating because fighting for justice and equality isn't popular. That's the difference between charity and justice. Charity makes us feel great. Justice, if we are the ones benefiting from injustice, is the opposite. There's a saying that says, when you're accustomed to privilege, equality feels like oppression. And I don't mean that to be directed at any one group. All of us have privilege of one sort or another, whether it's based on our race, gender, sexual orientation, class, or being able-bodied. Dr. King knew that. He said, God is the only being in the universe that can say, I am, and put a period behind it. Each of us sitting here today has to say, I am because of my parents, I am because of certain environmental conditions, I am because of certain hereditary circumstances, I am because of God. God is the only being that can just say, I am, and stop right there. But some of us also want to stop right there, because it's easier to live in the comfort of feeling that we deserve something than it is to live in the discomfort of knowing that we don't. It's easier for a relatively wealthy person to give money to a public school's fundraiser than it is to advocate for equal funding and equal opportunity at all schools. We have gotten used to benefiting from the privilege that we have for ourselves and our families and giving our leftovers as charity to those who can't. And that's a hard habit to break. I believe that is why America has taken to teaching instead that what Dr. King was really fighting for has either already been accomplished or will be accomplished if we could all just be colorblind. It's not that simple. Dr. King was never Black Santa Claus, spreading good cheer and dreams of children dancing in a technicolor field like in The Sound of Music, but with children of all different colors. That's not what gets someone assassinated. He was assassinated for fighting a fight that is hard to win and one that will inevitably make some people feel as if they have lost. That fight is not over, and it wasn't then and isn't now colorblind. The fight for humanity has to include everyone, but it also has to recognize those who are differently situated than we are. In 1967, Dr. King was advocating for a universal basic income. He wasn't advocating for limiting it to African Americans, but he also wasn't colorblind. He recognized that lifting the nation's poorest out of poverty would disproportionately help African Americans, saying that it's a nice thing to say to people that you ought to lift yourself by your own bootstraps, but it's a cruel jest to say to a bootless man that he ought to lift himself by his bootstraps. And the fact is that millions of Negroes, as a result of centuries of denial and neglect, have been left bootless. They find themselves impoverished aliens in this affluent society, and there is a great deal that the society can and must do if the Negro is to gain the economic security he needs. It's now 2019, and we still haven't done justice, economic or otherwise. Decades ago, Richard Pryor joked about a Black person going into a courtroom. You go down there looking for justice, that's what you're gonna find, just us. It's funny because it's true, and it's still true. In 2019, we haven't done justice, and we haven't done equality. In almost every area in which Dr. King worked, education, voting, housing, salaries, we haven't done equality. We haven't done it for African Americans or for other groups who are oppressed. Instead, we've taken to telling our children that we have. We've taken to distorting the legacy of Dr. King to try to support the fallacy that we have. When I was young and my sister had an idea that I didn't like, I used to tell her sarcastically, let's don't and say we did. And that's what America has done. We didn't and we say we did. And saying that we did stops us from doing what we are called to do. Just as Dr. King said in 1967, all the signs of our time indicate that this is a dark hour in the life of America. But Dr. King also said that we've got to struggle to the end, to see it through. And to do that, we have to indict our shortcomings. We have to resolve to do better at the breath of life. But we can't stop there. We have to have the resilience to keep going, past resolving to do better and to actually doing better. To obtain that resilience, we reach forward, we reach outward, and we reach upward. When Mahalia Jackson asked how we got over, no small part of the answer was and is faith. Faith that leads to perseverance, faith that lets us run the race and see what the end is going to be. Dr. King's personal faith kept him going, allowing him to have faith in the future because he could say, I don't know what the future holds, but I do know who holds the future. In the 3 dimensions of a complete life, he said that if we are to live a complete life, let us discover him. And if you discover this God, things will change in your life. People all around you will wonder how you are able to make it amid the dark and desolate moments. And isn't that the African American experience in America? Aren't we constantly wondering how we were, how we are, how we will be able to make it over? Dr. King had an answer for us. He said, love yourself. You are commanded to do that. That is the length of life. Love your neighbor as you love yourself. You are commanded to do that. That is the breath of life. But never forget that there is a first and even greater commandment. Love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, with all thy soul, and with all thy mind. That is the height of life. And when you do this, you'll live the complete life. I haven't yet lived the complete life. That may be part of why I so identify with this young pastor's sermon, maybe even more than the more famous one he delivered before his life came to an end. I've been to the mountaintop. I haven't been to the mountaintop. I haven't looked over. I'm not even sure, and I'm not going to tell you, that we as a people will get to the promised land of equality and justice. But I do know what generations of oppressed people all over the world have known, whether they were trying to make it over the Edmund Pettus Bridge or trying to make it over the Red Sea. And that is, as Psalm 27:13 says, I would have lost heart unless I had believed that I would see the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living. Thank you.